The overall impact of the committee's efforts in our community, I think, is something that should be discussed because it's a diverse community.
Yes.
But everyone rallies around Dr. Martin Luther King's birthday.
Yes.
My daughter come home the other day from school, and she started asking me questions about Dr. Martin Luther King. Now, when I was her age, Dr. Martin Luther King was still alive and preaching at that point. I hate to say it, I'm that old, but the point being, there was still no African-American history taught when I was young.
Right.
Yet she's learning about a leading figure from African-American culture. How do you think your efforts impact the rest of the community?
I think they impact them in a very positive way, Chris. As you know, Dr. King appealed in a broad sense. He was very inclusive, and there are many people in America today who benefited from his efforts and his life and his legacy. I think that the legacy that we're trying to promote more than anything is to promote racial harmony. That's what Dr. King was about. Yes, he was an African-American man. Yes, the African-American community was the community denied these basic civil rights, but there are so many different cultures who benefited from his life and his death, and we want to remind people of that, and we want to remind people to take advantage of that. One of the things that bothered me more than anything else, Mayor, is people like Dr. King died for the right to vote, for example, and fought very hard for it. And in our community, we still have people who think it's a crime to vote. I think that's a crime in itself. And I'm doing everything in my power, and Mr. Body's doing everything in his power to remind, particularly African-American people, that we have to get out and vote.
Well, the Voting Rights Act of '64, Larry, we've talked about it in the past, is a very powerful document. And here we are almost over 40 years later, and some people forget about that effort that was put in by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and others to get the Voting Rights Act passed.
Well, certainly, and you mentioned some 40 years. Just the other day, my wife and I were having a discussion. I said, wow, do you realize it's 40 years since, well, come April 4th, it will be the 40th anniversary of Dr. King's assassination. And as Reverend Adair has just alluded to, the fact that I think we overlook these things. But going back to your question, Mayor, about the impact of the committee in keeping Dr. King's ideals and goals alive, I think that the committee does a good job in terms of making people recognize that we do have this national holiday and that we should remember. I think we could do a better job in terms of getting the idea out that this is not just a one-day thing. As Dr.
How do you do that? Because that's a great
Well,
point.
I think that we have to maybe go into the schools and do some teaching, or at least encourage the schools. As you said, your daughter is learning, but I think that somehow the message gets lost. I don't think our children anyway, understand the real struggle that went on during that time. I would just like to relate this little story. I have a niece who is a sophomore at Piscataway High School. And in her English class this fall, they were asked to write an essay on Jim Crow. And she was the only one in her class who knew what Jim Crow was when the teacher first suggested that they write an essay about Jim Crow. And when she was embarrassed by the fact that she knew what Jim Crow was. And when she told her mom that, and her mom related that to my wife and I, we were like, wow, they don't know what Jim Crow was yet.
I'm willing to bet there's a lot of people here that don't know who it is.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And yet we've been celebrating Dr. King's life, supposedly, and his work all this long, but we don't know that one of his main things was fighting Jim Crow. So that's why I say I think we can do I know we can do a better job in educating both our young people and our adults as to what the movement was all about and the kinds of struggle that we've come
Well,
through.
it was Jim Crow led up to the Civil War.
Right.
You know, so the Reverend Adair, you're active in the community. Can you tell us about some of the other projects that you're involved with?
Yes, we're involved with the Construction Trades Union. It's targeting minorities and women. It's a great opportunity for people of color and women to come together and learn construction trades so that they can, of course, better their economic future. Another thing that we're doing, as you know, Mayor, I'm the vice president of the Elizabeth Municipal Alliance, and you alluded to DARE earlier in the show. Some of the things that we try to do during the DARE Day Jamboree is focus on violence in the community, and just, you know, I don't want to sound corny or anything. I just try to be that type of person 365 days a year that people can look to and say, you know, there's a man of faith, there's a man who believes in treating people fairly, there's a man that does not judge anyone by the color of their skin. I think that's the best way we can promote Dr. King, being those type of individuals. Treat people the same irregardless of their gender, their sexual orientation, which is a big discussion today, or their economic standing. And I think that's what King would want us to do.
Before we close, Larry, who do we contact if you're interested in celebrating any of these events?
Well, you can contact myself through the Mount Teman African Methodist Episcopal Church at 160 Madison Avenue. You can contact Reverend Adair. You can contact Denise Lowe, who heads up your Department of Tourism. She's a member of the committee. We also welcome this year to the committee Mr. Stanley Nerone, who I think heads up your youth department. Any of these people would be willing, more than willing and happy to sit down and talk to someone who wanted to join our committee.